All right, so that takes us to our last and final term that we're going to do today. And it's very fitting that this term actually has two definitions. The last term that we're going to do is the term sanctification. Okay? Now, I said sanctification has two terms, and it does, but they're very, very closely correlated. Okay? I'll give you both of them. The first term for sanctification, the first definition, is really to be called out of, right? Or to be set apart from, to be distinct from the world and its values, right? To be sanctified is to say, I'm not going to be part of the world, right? I'm out of that, right? The second definition goes very much along with someone who's been removed, right? And that is, sanctification is the lifelong process of becoming more and more holy, i.e. less like the world, and a lot more like Jesus, okay? So it's to be called out of the world, to be different, separated from the world, and it's to become a gradual process of being more and more like Jesus. Okay, that's the best definition of it. Paul is going to ask a question in Romans 6. I'm going to paraphrase this, okay? Paul is going to say, if we're not judged by our own righteousness, right? I got Jesus' righteousness. I'm not even being judged by my own my actions. Not judged by those. If that's the case, then can we just do whatever we want? Can we just sin as much as we want? We're not even judged by our own actions. You know? He says, should we just continue to sin so that grace can abound? I love what he says, because I can't help but hear like an old grandma or my grandma saying this in my head. He says, heaven forbid. No. Are you nuts? Right? He goes on later to explain why. People want to know why. If it's once saved, always saved, does that mean you can sin all you want? No. And do you know why? Paul identifies why. He says, look, it's very simple. Whoever you give yourself over to, you're a slave of that thing. You know? He says, do you try to avoid sin? Do you try to avoid sin at all costs? Yes, you fail. Yes, you mess up. You sometimes even make the same mistake. But do you try? Do you hate it? Do you run from it as best you can? Do you war with the flesh? Well, you're a slave to God. That's not somebody who has to be worried, right? But are you somebody who sins knowing that it's wrong? Are you somebody who claims to be a Christian but makes excuses for your sin? It's okay. Plus, I'm saved by grace. No. That's not somebody who's warring against the flesh. That's not somebody who's a slave to righteousness and to God. That's somebody that's a slave to sin. You know? And Jesus told us very clearly that you can't serve two masters. You got to pick one. You got to pick a side. Remember, Jesus talks about that in the book of Revelation. He says to one of the churches, he says, you guys are lukewarm, man. You got one leg on each side of the fence. He's like, that's gross. I'd rather you be either hot or cold, right? You can't serve two masters. Paul explains in Romans how being this slave of God, how it leads to a sanctified, a more pleasing life to God over time, right? He says this in Romans 6. In Romans 6, verse 22, listen to how he explains sanctification. Paul says, but now, since you've been liberated, what does that mean? Set free. We've been redeemed. We've been redeemed from sin, okay? And have been enslaved to God. You've been bought away from sin and enslaved to God. You have your fruit, right? This is results, right? He says, you have your fruit which results in sanctification. You've been redeemed out of sin to a life that you are aiming for God, to be pleasing to God in every way, in every day, in every action, in every thought. And what is the result of that? It's this process of looking more like Him. You know, have you ever noticed that when you hang around, you know, a group of friends more often, or here's a better example. Have you ever found yourself in a certain area of the country or a different country for a long period of time, and then you realize, wait, do I sound like I'm from Texas? Like, you know, you move down to Tennessee and all of a sudden you're talking like this, you know, and you're like, how'd that even happen? It's because it's all you've been around. Right? Paul says that's what the process of sanctification looks like. Jesus is rubbing off on you, you know? We're looking more and more like him. And look at what he says. He says, and the end. He says the result is sanctification, but what happens at the end? There's no other possible outcome but eternal life. Let me tell you something. People always ask, how do I know if I'm going to lose my salvation? Don't. Don't lose it. Seek Jesus every day, as often as you can possibly think about it. You do that, you stay close to the fire, you'll stay warm. Right? You want to be saved? Just stay focused on Jesus. There's no other possible outcome. And that's what Paul is saying here. He says, the result of your sanctification is you were so close to Jesus, you were 1,000,000 miles from losing your salvation. You were too close to lose it, to walk away, because your focus was on the right thing. I love that. I love that all of us that persist in seeking him, we not only look like him, but we can just have confidence. Have confidence in our salvation. Jesus gives us that. You know, Jesus said, peace I give you, not peace like the world. I give you real peace. You know, I like that. That eternity, that hope of eternity with God.